Hello again. My name's Mary. I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And as you know, the library is closed right now and we're unable to see our friends in the children's room. So we're coming to visit you with our story times and our readings and our how-tos. So today we're going to continue reading Some Writer, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet, published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in 2016. And I just want to say, as I read this book, it is filled with photographs and illustrations, and I just think you really want to try to find this book at the library when we're open again, so that you can look at the photographs and see pictures of E.B. White and his family, and especially his dogs. He had a lot of them. And the illustrations are a lot of fun too. And there's so much going on in them that you want to get the book so you can pour through and you can see Charlotte and you can see E.B. White and all the other things, because that's Wilbur. That's Charlotte, as you know. I was making sure you're paying attention. So now we're going to continue with the book. Chapter 6. A Time of Enchantment. When I got a place in the country, I was quite sure animals would appear. And they did. Andy became restless. He told Catherine he wanted to be more than a successful New Yorker writer. In an article about the Great Depression, Andy wrote, "The hope I see for the world is to simplify life." His parents had died within a short time of each other. World War II was underway. Andy had recently been criticized for writing about the war, but not offering any solutions. He was uneasy with the celebrity of writers in New York City and frustrated with the New Yorker's policy that editorial writers had to write from the point of view of we. He didn't like having his articles sound as if more than one person had written them. Andy wanted to write from his own point of view about whatever he wanted. And he wanted to do it in Maine. Disenchanted, he took a year off and went by himself to Maine to write My Year, as he called it. But he wrote only one long poem. When he returned to New York, Andy convinced Catherine that they could both work for Maine. Joel would attend the local two-room schoolhouse. Within a few days of Andy's announcing he was leaving New York and the New Yorker, although he agreed to continue editing news breaks, the editors of Harper's Magazine asked him if he would write essays from Maine for the magazine. They'd call his column One Man's Meat. He had to write only one piece a month. And more important, he could write about anything and everything that interested him. In Maine, Andy composed his essays for Harper's while tending the animals, shingling his barn, fishing with Joel. The best writing, he said, is often done by persons who are snatching time from something else. Joel liked their new home life in Maine, too. There was time for skating, sledding, and sailing. Andy rigged a rope swing in the barn for Joel and built him his first boat, a flat-bottomed scow named Flounder. The boat plans came from a book Andy had kept since childhood. When his parents asked Joel what the biggest difference was between his school in country and his school in city, he answered that in Maine, the days went by just like lightning. I have discovered, rather too late in life, that there's nothing so much fun as building a boat. The best thing about building a boat is that it allows absolutely no time for writing. There isn't a minute to spare. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1944. The scow was Joe's first solo experience with the water. I built her from a picture in the American Boy's Handy Book, using pluck in place of know-how. And when she glided into the frog pond and Joe dancing around, it was my finest hour. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1983. Part of Catherine's job at the New Yorker was reviewing children's books for a column she titled Children's Shelf. Review copies poured into the Whites' farmhouse. Books were piled everywhere, inside cupboards, under cushions, on stair landings. In an essay for Harper's called Children's Books, Andy wrote that he'd found himself flat on his stomach, reading about how to build a treehouse. The final touch was to include a small radio. Andy wrote, "It must be a lot of fun to write for children. Reasonably easy work, perhaps even important work." When Andy was growing up, he read with a passionate interest all the books by William J. Long, a naturalist who wrote about animals in the wilds of Maine. But as an adult, he found most of the children's books dull, except for one, The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins by Dr. Seuss. This book seemed to him to be in the spirit of nonsense. Andy's essay about children's books caught the eye of Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, who sent it to Anne Carroll Moore. Moore was a book reviewer and a children's librarian at the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, the library where the famous statues of two lions sit out front, and the library from which Andy had taken out books as a boy. After Moore read the Harper's essay, she sent Catherine and Andy a letter urging Andy to write a children's book. "I feel sure you could, if you would, and I assure you the library lions would roar with all their praise. Andy didn't want to be prodded, but he happened to have that story about a mouse tucked away in a drawer. He later wrote James Thurber, who is now a preeminent cartoonist and writer. I have a children's book, half done. Months later, Andy sent an unfinished manuscript to Eugene Saxton, his editor at Harper and Brothers, which published Andy's adult books. He told Saxton that this story would seem to be for children, but I'm not fussy who reads it. He added, "You'll be shocked and grieved to discover that the principal character in the story has somewhat the attributes and appearance of a mouse." Saxton was not grieved. He could hardly wait. But it would be another 6 years before Stuart Little was born. Once in everyone's life, there's apt to be a period when he is fully awake instead of half asleep. I think of those 5 years in Maine as the time when this happened to me. Confronted by new challenges, surrounded by new acquaintances, including the characters in the barnyard who were later to appear in Charlotte's Web, I was suddenly seeing, feeling, and listening as a child sees, feels, and listens. It was one of those rare interludes that can never be repeated, a time of enchantment. I am fortunate indeed to have had the chance to get some of it down on paper. From One Man's Meat. Date 1982. Chapter 7. Stuart Little. My innocent tale of the quest for beauty. During World War II, many people who were working at the New Yorker left the magazine to help with the war effort. Harold Ross was so understaffed that Andy and Catherine moved back to New York for a time to help him keep the magazine running. Joel went to a private school in New Hampshire. Catherine nagged Andy to finish Stuart Little. Anne Carroll Moore nagged too. When his editor nagged Andy about getting the book out, Andy wrote back to him, "I would rather wait a year than publish a bad children's book, as I have too much respect for children." But as time went on, the news of the war, the move back to New York, and his own writing made Andy anxious, nervous. He said his head felt as if there was a kite caught in the branches somewhere, and mice in the subconscious. He described how he felt at a particularly low moment. "I was almost sure I was about to die. My head felt so queer." On the off chance that he was about to die, Andy wanted to finish his children's book so Catherine and Joel would have enough money to live on. Meanwhile, his editor had died. Just 8 weeks after moving back to New York, Andy sent the finished manuscript of Stuart Little to his new editor at Harper and Brothers, Ursula Nordstrom. Ursula wrote, "Only another children's book editor can know the emotions one has on hearing that a famous writer of adult books is going to send a book for children. For talent in the former does not always carry over to the latter." But she was relieved after she read Andy's manuscript. "I loved the diminutive hero, and I knew children would." Typically, the editor alone chooses the illustrator for a children's book, but Ursula included Andy in the search. They considered E.H. Shepard, the illustrator of Winnie the Pooh. They asked Robert Lawson, who had illustrated the story of Ferdinand, but he was unavailable. Another 5 illustrators were rejected because their mice looked too much like Disney's Mickey Mouse. Finally, Andy suggested the artist Garth Williams, whose work he had seen when Garth was trying to sell cartoons to the New Yorker. Even though Garth had never illustrated a book before, his sketches for Stuart Little were just what Andy and Ursula had been hoping for. After Andy saw Garth's final art for the book, he wrote, "I think Garth deserves all the bouquets that could be handed him for the brilliant and imaginative job. He's made the pictures enhance and add to the text in the way only the very best illustrators can, and has made the book his book too, in every way." The publisher's catalog described Andy's novel this way: "Stuart Little is small in size only, has the adventurousness, the great purpose, and the indomitable spirit of a classic figure, and his story is funny and tender and exciting by turns." Andy didn't like the word classic. No book was a classic before generations of readers proved it to be, he said. Andy claimed Stuart Little was just another book. To his distress, his publisher used the term anyway. When the book was almost ready to go to press, Ursula sent Anne Carroll Moore a copy of the manuscript. Everyone was eager to hear if Stuart Little would make the library lions roar. But Moore wrote a friend, "I was never so disappointed in a book in my life." She wrote an urgent 14-page letter to the Whites, explaining why Stuart Little, with its monstrous birth, should not be published. Not only was the story unfit for children and out of hand, but White had blurred the line between fantasy and reality. How could a mouse be born to humans? The two worlds are all mixed up, she wrote. "I fear Stuart Little will be very difficult to place in libraries and schools all over the country." Catherine wrote a polite reply. "You were right, of course, that Stuart gets out of hand. Didn't you think it even funny? What I hope is that children of all ages will like Stuart for its humor. It's a dream, quite literally, just as Alice is supposed to have been. Just recently, the notes Andy made after he had that dream more than 12 years ago turned up, and I was surprised to find out how clearly the story followed them. A few days after Stuart Little came out, Andy's boss, Harold Ross, barged into his office. "Saw your book, White. You made one serious mistake." Ross told him he should have said that Stuart was adopted, not born to the Little family. Maybe the worst criticism of all came from the librarian, Frances Clark Sayers, Moore's recent successor at the New York Public Library, who stamped on it, "Not recommended for purchase by expert." Other libraries banned it too. E.B. White began to wonder if he had made a serious mistake. But what did the real experts think? Letters from children started pouring in. Of the thousands Andy received, only 2 questioned how Stuart came into the world. Though many were uncertain about the ending, most loved the book. March 11, 1946. Dear Mr. White, we have just finished your book, Stuart Little. Our school librarian asked us to read it to help decide whether it would be a good book for the library. We think it would be. In fact, we think you stopped too soon. We'd like a continuation of this story. Sincerely yours, the 7th grade. Children were proving Stuart Little to be a classic in the making. In the loveliest town of all, where the houses were white and high, and the elm trees were green and higher than the houses, where the front yards were wide and pleasant, and the backyards were bushy and worth finding out about, where the streets sloped down to the stream, and the stream flowed quietly under the bridge, where the lawns ended in orchards, and the orchards ended in fields, and the fields ended in pastures, and the pastures climbed the hill and disappeared over the top toward the wonderful wide sky. In this loveliest of all towns, Stuart stopped to get a drink of sarsaparilla. From Stuart Little. Date 1945. It's unnerving to be told you're bad for children, Andy confessed. But he learned 2 things from writing Stuart Little. A writer's instinct is his best guide, and children can sail easily over the fence that separates reality from make-believe. A fence that can throw a librarian is nothing to a child. Later, in the same year that the book came out, Ursula wrote to tell Andy that it had sold 100,000 copies. Andy gave her a jar of caviar, a gift of 100,000 sturgeon eggs. In later editions of Stuart Little, E.B. White made one small change. the little son was not born. Stuart arrived. A letter E.B. White wrote to Ursula Nordstrom. Dear Miss Nordstrom, I feel like the millionth person through a turnstile, dazed and happy. Dear me, 100,000 books. It's a little indecent, isn't it? Yours, E.B. White. When I recover from my 100th head cold, which is now upon me, I'd like to take you to a milestone luncheon at some fashionable restaurant in celebration. You can eat 100,000 stalks of celery, and I'll swallow 100,000 olives. It will be the E.B. White, Ursula Nordstrom Book and Olive Luncheon. Well, we're going to end today on that note, and we will continue Some Writer, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet, tomorrow, the same time. This book was published in 2016 by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I hope you're enjoying it, and as I said, I hope when we're open again, you'll come to the library to find a copy so you can pore over the photos and illustrations. So till next time, bye-bye.